Hi, my name is Brendan Staples, and today I'll be reading for you a selection from my work titled Water's Edge, a fantasy coming-of-age novel in which our heroine, Damia, discovers aspects of herself, both mundane and magical, as she finds a place in a world as fresh to her as it is to you. So here we go. Chapter 1, Stow. The girl, perhaps only 10 years old, shivered in the crevice she had tucked herself into as she sat in the cargo hold of the ship. Her dress, more a burlap sack, didn't provide much warmth to burn away the chill in her bones that had set in during her days-long walk along the Celian coast. There was a mild humidity in the hold, but nothing that could warm her up enough to cease the chattering of her teeth. She didn't want to move until she knew the ship was moving, however. If the ship was in motion, then its crew would probably be occupied. She didn't want to be discovered before they left port. Once the ship began to lurch, she knew that it was safe to move. She was hungry. When she had left, she'd only brought enough food for a day or two. It was all that she could bear to take with her, and probably more than she really deserved to have. Despite her need for nourishment, she needed rest even more. Her limbs were far too sore and much too numb to walk with any coordination, only allowing her to move with the support of the hull and the crates. She scoured the cargo hold for a better hiding place, until she came across a tarp-covered box, with just enough burlap loose for her to burrow into. In any other circumstance, the tarp shouldn't have provided much more warmth than the girl's dress, but against all odds, she began to shed the chill as though she had willed it so. The girl's first foray into the rest of the ship came later, after she had slept for a while. Warmer and rested, her goals now were to find food and remain hidden. She searched for an exit from the cargo hold, and, perhaps a testament to her luck, discovered the ship's kitchen not too far away from where she was staying, only about 3 doorways down. She made sure to stay low and close to the walls as she made her approach into the kitchen. Luckily, there didn't appear to be anybody there at the moment. There were canvas and burlap sacks piled in each corner, accompanied by a barrel or two, and a pot sat upon the stove against the far wall of the room, upon which was a small porthole that revealed that it was dipping into the twilight hours. A series of shelves lined the walls, all flush with labeled jars and ceramic pots containing things like butter, salt, and garlic, all things that were just out of her reach and of little interest to her. She opened one of the sacks in the corner closest to her, and was blessed with the sight of apples, something both familiar and much beloved. Her stomach groaned. As she pulled one out to sate her appetite, however, she heard footsteps coming from down the hall. As quickly as she could, she burrowed into one of the piles, tucked her long black hair into her dress, and curled into a ball to make herself scarce. She waited for the footsteps to pass, but to her dismay and terror, their owner entered the kitchen. A large, hunched man with greenish-gray flesh and sizable tusks lumbered his way to the pot resting on the stove, his messy mop of hair, a mix of dark brown and faded gray, swaying with each step. He glanced about the room for several seconds, picked up a knife that the girl had not seen earlier from the countertop, and began chopping something. The girl's heart was racing, matching the speed at which the large man was chopping away at whatever it was. She held her apple close to her face, taking in its sweet scent, wanting to take even a single bite. She couldn't move a muscle, however, a risk being noticed by the hulking figure that was no more than a few steps away from her. She held her breath as the man turned around, revealing to her a clear vision of his face. There were bags under his eyes and lines etched all across his face, each one marking a decade or so, at least according to the words of her mother. His eyes were a frightening yellow that were very distinct upon his features, something out of a nightmare. He took a step in her direction, reaching into one of the barrels near her, and pulling out what appeared to be some kind of salted fish. The girl just wanted him to leave, even if it was only for a minute, just long enough so she could steal away with a small armful of apples. What would make someone leave the kitchen? As though to answer her silent question, she heard the hulking man gasp before muttering to himself in an aged, gravelly voice. "Shite, a rat." He quickly exited through the doorway, muttering to himself more. Where'd the little bugger scamper off to? The girl took her chance to snatch a few more apples from the sack and scamper back off towards the cargo hold, ducking into one of the other doorways until the man returned to the kitchen. It seemed to be where somebody slept, and as she scanned the room, the girl's eyes fell upon a straw pillow that sat at the head of the cot. She knew that she was already taking more than she deserved, but sleeping in the cargo hold was dreadfully uncomfortable. She heard from the hall the same voices before. "Cap's not gonna like this." And the chopping began soon after, announcing to the girl that the coast was clear. She grabbed the pillow from atop the cot and scurried back into the cargo hold to eat and rest. Chapter 2. Birthed of the Sea. The girl, closing her eyes and holding her breath just as she was told, was slowly leaned back and submerged into the shallow part of the ocean as her mother and father spoke a prayer to the god of the sea. The words were clear to begin with, but as the water of the ocean took her, it grew muffled until it was completely silent. The world was cold beneath the waves, even with the hands of her parents holding her underneath. The longer she laid there, the more she began to feel as though she was floating in the deepest trench. Her senses dulled. Even knowing the Akushte dwelled in the waters, she felt safe there, comfortable and out of danger. There was nothing that threatened her in her own personal bubble. The girl opened her eyes and saw that she was floating far beneath the water, somewhere where the rays of the sun barely reached. She was alone, and as she lay there, suspended in the crushing depths, she felt an unprecedented calm. She closed her eyes again to immerse herself in it once more. In a moment, she was ripped from beneath the water's surface, exposed to the subtle heat of the sun and the cool breeze carried by the ocean. She wiped the water away from her face and turned to the one who had pulled her from her peace. Chapter 3. The Blaine. When the girl awoke, she was greeted by the sight of a man with stubble, slightly pointed ears, and a curious grin on his face squatting above her. His skin was bronze, and his eyes were greener than the field in the spring. He was a half-elf, like the one she had known from home. She clambered to her feet, knocking his chin with the top of her head as she skittered backwards, realizing now that he wasn't alone. There was a man stood beside him with gray skin that looked like stone, and eyes like pearls, much like the girl's own, as well as the large man from before leaning against some cargo. "Well, Gibbons, looks like we found your rat," said the crouched man, rubbing his now sore chin. He looked down to where the girl had been, his eyes falling upon the sleeping setup she made, finishing with a chuckle. "And your pillow." The girl heard the large man harumph from his post as she saw him shift slightly. The half-elf in front of the girl examined her, taking in her crimson flesh and the horns that curled along the top of her head, twisting away slightly at their ends. She was eyeing the three of them suspiciously. "So, missy, what's a little girl like you doing in the cargo hold of me ship? Last I checked, I wasn't transporting people. Not that kind of ship, right, Lucero?" He punctuated his question with a joking look and a light elbow to the ribs of the stony man beside him. Redirecting his gaze to the girl, he asked, "Got a name then, little devil folk?" The girl covered her face with her hair and curled her tail around the front of her, looking down and away from the half-elven man and keeping silent. "No need to be shy, missy. I'm Abbott," he said, extending a gloved hand towards her. "But the fellas on this ship call me Cap. Listen, I've no problem with you staying on me ship, but those who travel with the Blaine put in their share of work." He motioned a thumb towards the large man behind him and said, "All I ask is that you help Gibbons over there with some of the cleaning for as long as you're living aboard this here ship. You'll get a bit of food, and you can even stay somewhere other than the cargo hold if you want." Abbott looked to the girl, awaiting some sort of answer. When he realized that he wasn't coaxing anything out of her, he stood up and began to leave, motioning for the others to follow. Before he exited into the other section of the ship, he looked over his shoulder and called out to the girl. "By the by, missy, if you won't help clean up, you aren't permitted to any of the food we've got in the galley by any means." And that is all. Thank you for listening.